The land was raw and untamed, as though the earth itself still remembered the wars men waged upon it. Evening shadows stretched long across the desert floor, and a storm threatened in the distant mountains. But the Apache warrior moved silently through it all, as much a part of the wilderness as the rocks and the wind. His name was Taza, and he had learned long ago that survival meant seeing what others missed, the broken branch of a mesquite bush, the faint scuff of moccasin leather on dirt, the stillness of birds where danger had passed. That was why he found her. The settler woman had collapsed near the riverbank, a pale figure in the fading light, her dress torn and dirt-stained. At first, he thought she was already gone, another careless wanderer who had tried to cross Apache land unprepared. But then her chest rose faintly, ragged, and her lips parted in a breath so shallow it was nearly invisible. She clutched her side with trembling fingers, and it was only when Taza drew closer that he saw what pinned her there, an arrow shaft buried deep in her flesh, blood soaking her dress in dark blotches. He froze. She was White, his people's enemy, a stranger who belonged to those who had brought grief and ruin to his family. His first thought was to leave her. Nature would finish what the arrow had begun. He owed her nothing. Yet something, perhaps the flicker of her eyelids, or the sound of her breath, fragile and uneven, kept him rooted in place. Her eyes opened suddenly, glazed with pain, and found him. Wide, frightened, yet pleading. She tried to shift, her hand twitching toward the arrow. "Please," she whispered, her voice thin as wind over stone. "Please, don't pull it." Her words struck him with an odd force. She was begging him not to act. Most people, he knew, would cry out to have the arrow removed, to be freed of the foreign object in their body. But she understood. Some wounds, if disturbed, poured out life faster than any hand could stop. The arrowhead might have pierced a vessel. Pulling it could mean certain death. And still, even as she begged, her eyes glimmered with the knowledge that he held her fate in his hands. Taza's instincts warred inside him. He was a warrior trained to act decisively. He had pulled arrows from flesh before his own, his brother's fallen comrades. He knew the risks, but he also knew hesitation could kill. And yet here she was, this woman who should mean nothing to him, asking for mercy in the only way she could, by forbidding him to save her. He crouched beside her, his shadow falling across her face. Her breathing was shallow, and she smelled of iron and fear. He noticed then how young she was, not more than 20 summers. Her cheeks, though pale, were smooth, her lips cracked but shaped as though they had once held laughter. She was not what he expected of the enemy. Not a soldier. Not a fighter. Just a girl caught in the jaws of a cruel fate. Why here? He muttered, almost to himself, though he doubted she could answer. She blinked at him slowly, her gaze drifting. For a moment, he thought she would slip into unconsciousness. Then her lips moved again. Ran. Away. Her words were fractured, heavy with exhaustion, but the meaning settled into him. She was not merely wounded, she was fleeing something. But from whom? Settlers? Her own people? Or had she wandered into the wrong land and paid the price? The Apache warrior sat back on his heels, eyes narrowing. His mind told him to leave her, to let the earth claim what it always did in time. But another part of him, deeper and more dangerous, whispered differently. He had once known what it was to cradle the wounded, to fight for the life of someone fragile and precious. Those days were gone, buried in the ashes of loss. But something about this woman stirred the memory. The sky darkened as the storm grew closer, the first cool gust sweeping down the canyon. Her breath rattled, weak. If he left her here, she would not last an hour, and so he remained, crouched at her side, torn between old hatred and an unexpected pull of duty. Her plea echoed in his mind, Don't pull it, a command laced with fear, trust, and desperation. He did not yet know what he would choose. All he knew was that for the first time in many seasons, he hesitated, and for a man like Taza, hesitation was dangerous. The storm crept closer. Rolling across the canyon like a herd of buffalo, its thunder rumbling low and menacing. The Apache warrior Taza sat rigidly by the wounded woman, the arrow still jutting cruelly from her side. His instinct screamed at him to act, but her words echoed in his ears. Please, don't pull it. Her voice was weak, yet it carried the weight of someone who had seen death before and knew how quickly it came. She clutched the shaft with trembling fingers, as if her fragile grip alone could keep her blood inside. Every rise and fall of her chest seemed like a battle her body might lose at any moment. Taza studied her in silence, his dark eyes narrowing. He had seen arrows pierce flesh 100 times sometimes. A warrior's life could be saved by leaving the arrow in place until skilled hands could treat it. Other times, the arrow itself poisoned the wound, carrying dirt and rust deeper into the body. Both truths warred in his mind. You will die, he said finally, his voice low, almost a growl. Her lips parted, and a ghost of a smile flickered there, faint as candlelight. Maybe, she whispered, her words shallow. But not yet. Not here. Her stubbornness surprised him. Even at the edge of death, this woman, this stranger, clung to life with a quiet, fierce dignity. She was not begging for mercy anymore. She was bargaining with fate, with him, with herself. The wind rose, carrying sand against his skin, stinging like tiny blades. He had to decide. If he left her, the storm would bury her. If he pulled the arrow, her blood could flow out too fast. If he did nothing, she would slip into darkness before dawn. Taza's jaw tightened. He remembered when he had been on the ground like her, long ago. An arrow had found his thigh, and his brother had been the one to pull it. The memory came unbidden, his brother's steady hands, his voice whispering words of courage. That brother was gone now, taken by war. Yet the memory lingered like a ghost, reminding him that sometimes hesitation was the cruelest choice. Still, he could not ignore her plea. Her eyes, pale as riverstone, met his again. If you pull it, she murmured, her voice breaking, I'll bleed out. Before you can stop it. He felt something shift inside him. She did not speak as one ignorant of wounds. Somehow she knew. Perhaps she had seen death up close. Perhaps she had cared for others before being abandoned herself. Whatever the truth, her words were not just fear, they were knowledge. Then what do you want? He demanded, harsher than intended. Her fingers tightened weakly over the arrow shaft. Don't pull. Just keep me alive, please. The last word please hung in the air, fragile as a bird's cry. For the first time in many seasons, Taza felt torn. He was used to making decisions quickly, with a hunter's precision. Life or death, mercy or vengeance, fight or retreat, his instincts had carried him through battles and loss. But now a wounded settler girl, someone he should have turned away from without thought, had unsettled him with nothing but her broken whisper. Her breathing grew shallower, her skin colder. He knew he could not linger in indecision much longer. The storm's first raindrops began to fall, darkening the earth around them. Time was slipping through his fingers. Slowly, deliberately, he reached for her hand, not the one gripping the arrow, but the one lying limply against her dress. Her fingers twitched in surprise at his touch. He had not meant it as comfort, but as a test to see if there was still strength left in her. There was. Barely. Then I will keep you alive, he said finally. His voice carried no warmth, only resolve, but it was enough to make her exhale in relief. The decision was made. He would not pull the arrow, not yet. But that meant he would have to stay with her, fight for her life against the storm. the wound and the weakness dragging her under. She had bound him with her plea. Though neither of them spoke of it aloud, as thunder split the sky above them, Taza lifted her carefully into his arms. She gasped, the movement sending waves of pain through her, but she did not cry out. Her head dropped against his shoulder, her breath hot and shallow against his neck. He carried her away from the riverbank into the gathering dark. The storm raged, but he moved swiftly, each step chosen with care. For reasons he could not yet name, he had chosen to bear the burden of her life, and though her words haunted him, "Don't pull it," he knew the true weight of them had only just begun. The storm battered the canyon, rain falling in sheets that turned the earth to mud and the riverbank into a slick of treacherous footing. Taza pushed on, carrying the wounded woman in his arms as if she weighed nothing. Though her every shallow breath reminded him of the fragile life slipping away inside her, he found shelter in a shallow cave carved into the stone by centuries of wind. The fire-blackened walls told him it had been used before by travelers, but tonight it would be theirs alone. He set her down gently, wrapping her in his cloak of deerskin, shielding her from the chill that came with the storm's fury. Her skin was clammy, her face pale as bone, and the arrow still jutted cruelly from her side. The shaft shook with each of her breaths. Taza knew this could not last. Every heartbeat was a gamble. He knelt beside her, running his calloused fingers carefully around the wound, assessing the damage. She stirred weakly, her eyelids fluttering. "No," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I told you. Don't pull it." Her plea lingered in the dim cave, fragile and desperate. But Taza's instincts rebelled. He had treated wounds before. He knew what corruption could fester inside a body when iron and dirt were left buried deep. If he left it in, the storm might pass, but fever would claim her. And if the arrowhead had splintered near a vessel, then leaving it was only a slower death. His jaw tightened. For so long, he had made his choices with clarity, guided by the harsh truths of survival. But this woman had unsettled him. She did not beg for her life in selfish fear. She begged him not to make a mistake that could kill her faster. And he hated that her voice, broken and trembling as it was, made him hesitate. Finally, he drew a deep breath and muttered in Apache, half to himself, half to the spirits of his ancestors, "Better to face death than to let it rot inside." With that, he gripped the shaft. Her eyes widened, horror flashing through them, and she tried to lift her hand. But she was too weak to stop him. Her broken whisper tore at the air. "Please don't," but the warrior did. With one swift motion, Taza pulled the arrow free. Blood welled immediately, hot and dark, spilling over his fingers. His breath caught, his stomach knotting. He had seen men bleed out in moments from wounds like this. For an instant, his blood ran cold with the fear that he had just killed her with his own hands. Her scream ripped through the cave, echoing off the stone walls, before it fell into ragged, whimpering breaths. She sagged against the earth, her eyes rolling back. Her body trembling. Taza acted without hesitation now, his hands moving with practiced speed. He pressed hard against the wound with a strip of cloth torn from his own shirt, his weight bearing down to staunch the flow. Blood soaked through quickly, but he pressed harder, whispering rough words in his native tongue. Words meant for warriors fighting to stay alive. "Hold on. Do not let go. Breathe." The minutes stretched long, the storm outside roaring as if in mockery of his struggle. His arms burned with the effort of holding pressure steady, but slowly, agonizingly slowly, the bleeding began to slow. Her chest still rose and fell, faint but steady, and relief flickered in him like a fragile flame. When he dared to ease the pressure, he inspected the wound. It was ugly, ragged from where the arrowhead had torn muscle. But it was clean now, no longer poisoned by rust and dirt. If infection didn't set in, she might live. He leaned back against the stone wall, chest heaving with the weight of what he had done. His hands were stained red, her blood dripping onto the cave floor. He glanced at her pale face, her lips parted in exhausted silence, and a strange shiver coursed through him. He had defied her plea. He had ignored her fear. And yet, in doing so, he might have saved her life or ended it. The burden of that choice pressed heavy on him, heavier than the storm outside. For a moment, he let himself look at her not as an enemy, not as a burden, but as a woman lying between life and death because of him. Her face, drawn and pained, still held a quiet strength even in unconsciousness. Something about it stirred an ache in his chest. Something long buried and dangerous. Taza set his jaw and began preparing herbs from the pouch he carried, determined to fight whatever sickness might come. He would not let her die, not now, not after choosing to pull the arrow. Still, her whispered plea haunted him. "Don't pull it," and though his hands worked with steady skill, his heart carried the weight of her words, and the chilling fear that when she woke, if she woke, she might hate him for the choice he had made. The storm raged through the night, hurling sheets of rain against the canyon walls. But inside the shallow cave it was another kind of storm, one of blood, sweat, and fear. Taza's cloak was soaked red where it pressed against the woman's wound, his fingers stiff from holding pressure for so long. Every time he loosened his grip to change the dressing, fresh blood welled up. And every time his stomach clenched in dread, the woman drifted in and out of consciousness, her face pale as ash, lips cracked and trembling. Sometimes she whimpered softly, words fractured and lost in the storm's roar. Other times her eyelids fluttered open, her gaze cloudy yet filled with pain and accusation. And always, like a ghost haunting him, her broken voice echoed in his head. "Please, don't pull it." He had done it anyway, and now he was paying for that choice with every drop of her blood staining his hands. He tore strips from his own shirt, binding them tightly around her waist, forcing the wound closed as best he could. His motions were quick, practiced, born of years tending battlefield injuries, but for the first time in years his hands shook. He muttered to himself in Apache, calling on the spirits of his ancestors, on the memory of his brother who had once pulled an arrow from his thigh and saved him. "Guide my hands. Don't let her die." But even as he worked, doubt gnawed at him. What if she was right? What if pulling the arrow had sealed her fate? Her breathing hitched suddenly, shallow and uneven. Panic clawed at his chest. He tipped her head gently back, lifting a water skin to her lips. She swallowed weakly, a few drops sliding down her chin. Her eyes flickered open then, glassy but searching, and her hoarse voice rasped. "You shouldn't have—" The words cut him deeper than any blade. He wanted to tell her she was wrong, that leaving the arrow in would have killed her faster, that he had saved her, not doomed her. But the truth was, he didn't know. "Not yet. You will live," he said firmly, forcing strength into his voice even though he felt none. "I won't let you go." She gave a weak, humorless laugh that dissolved into a cough. "Not your choice." For a moment, silence filled the cave except for the storm's thunder and the ragged sound of her breaths. Taza pressed his palms hard against the bandages, feeling the warmth of her blood seeping through. His own chest tightened, a cold dread spreading through him. He was a warrior who had faced death without fear, but this, watching life slip away under his hands, left him hollow and powerless. Desperation drove him to act. He dug into the small pouch tied at his belt, pulling out dried herbs, roots, and a small stone vial of crushed willow bark. With practiced motions, he chewed the bitter roots to release their healing oils, then pressed the mixture into the wound, binding it tightly with fresh strips of hide. The pungent smell of sage and cedar smoke filled the cave as he lit a small fire to purify the air. His mind racing through every lesson of healing passed down from his people. The hours stretched long. She tossed in fevered half-sleep, whispering words he couldn't always understand. Names he didn't know. Pleas half-formed. Once, her hand reached out blindly, gripping his wrist with surprising strength. Her touch was cold, trembling, but it anchored him in that moment, proof she still clung to life. Tiazia leaned close, his voice low and steady. Stay. Do not leave this world yet. Your fight is not finished. Whether she heard him or not, he couldn't say, but she did not let go of his wrist until sleep finally dragged her under again. When at last the storm broke and dawn's pale light crept into the cave, Taza sat slumped against the wall, exhaustion weighing him down. His hands were raw, his chest hollow from the endless battle to keep her alive. Yet she still breathed, faint but steady. Relief washed over him, but it was not pure. It carried the bitter taste of guilt. He had defied her plea. He had pulled the arrow, and though she lived for now, her words haunted him still. And deep in his chest, beneath the warrior's armor of resolve, another realization took root, a dangerous one. This woman was no longer just a wounded stranger. She had become his responsibility, and if she died, her ghost would never let him go. The fire crackled low in the darkened night, sending faint sparks upward toward the star-filled sky. Yet for Kale, the Apache warrior, there was no warmth left in the flames. His hands trembled against the weight of the bloodied arrow shaft. And though his body had weathered battle and hardship before, this moment stripped him raw. He stared at the woman before him, Evelyn, the settler's daughter who had once been nothing more than a figure on the other side of a cultural divide. Now she was bleeding, pale, her breath shallow. Her earlier words echoed in his ears like a haunting refrain. Please, don't pull it. He had pulled because every instinct in him said he must. And now his blood ran cold with the realization of what he had done. The shaft had slid free from her flesh, but with it had come a gush of crimson, darker than night. Her body shuddered and her lips moved as if whispering something too faint to hear. Kale pressed his hand to the wound, but it felt like trying to stop a river with bare palms. His breath quickened, fear gripping him in a way he had never felt, not in war, not in exile, not even when death had brushed his own shoulders. For the first time in his life, Kale realized the depth of his own helplessness. Warriors were trained to act without hesitation, to kill without remorse, to protect their people even at the cost of their own lives. But this was different. This was one woman, fragile yet fierce, who had defied him, challenged him, and somehow carved her way into his soul. If she died, it would not be just another casualty, it would be his fault. Stay with me, he whispered harshly, pressing harder on the wound. Don't you close your eyes. Don't you dare. His voice broke, the edge of command blunted by desperation. Evelyn's eyelids fluttered, her pale lashes damp with tears. She gave a small, broken laugh that sounded more like a sob. Bossy. Even now. That single sound, a ghost of her fire tore through him. He felt anger, not at her, but at himself. How had he misjudged the danger? He should have waited, should have listened to her plea. She had known something he had ignored, and now she was paying the price. The weight of guilt settled heavy on his chest. He lifted his eyes to the heavens, a silent curse forming in his mind. His people believed the spirits watched over every man and woman, guiding fate's hand. But tonight, Kale wondered if the spirits had abandoned him. What use was his strength, his training, his bloodline, if he could not save the one person who had come to matter most? He worked feverishly, tearing strips of cloth, binding them around her torso, whispering words in Apache under his breath, half prayer, half promise. The cloth turned dark almost instantly, and he had to add more, pressing hard. willing her heartbeat to stay steady beneath his touch. Every second stretched into eternity. The night seemed to close in, every sound magnified, the hiss of the fire, the rasp of her breathing, the hammering of his own pulse in his ears. His blood had run cold the moment the arrow came free, but now a different fire burned inside him. He would not lose her. "Evelyn," he said again, softer now, his voice carrying both command and plea. "Look at me. Hear me. You will live. You must live." Her eyes fluttered open briefly, hazy and unfocused. "Why? Do you care so much?" The question stabbed at him, because he had no answer ready, only the truth he had buried for weeks, perhaps longer. He cared because somewhere between mistrust and reluctant companionship, she had become part of him. Her stubbornness had matched his. Her courage had surprised him. And her laughter, rare though it was, had warmed something in him he thought long dead. But he could not say all of that now. Not while blood still seeped beneath his fingers. So he spoke the only vow that mattered. "Because I will not let you die. Not here. Not tonight." He tightened the bandage, whispering again to the spirits, this time not as a warrior demanding victory, but as a man begging for mercy. And in that moment, Cale understood what it meant for blood to run cold. It was not fear of his own death, but the terror of losing hers. The night pressed heavy, suffocating in its silence. Only the crackling of the fire and the ragged rhythm of Evelyn's breath broke the stillness. Cale sat rigid, his hands slick with her blood, his chest heaving with the effort of keeping himself calm. Every instinct screamed at him to act, but the wrong move could finish her. His people had taught him how to survive wounds, how to set bones, stop bleeding, stitch torn flesh, but Evelyn was not Apache. Her body was not trained to endure pain the way his people were, and she had already lost too much blood. He could feel it in the clammy chill of her skin, in the way her eyelids drooped as if the world weighed too heavy to hold open. "Don't close your eyes," he growled softly, almost begging, brushing his fingers against her cheek. "Stay awake for me." Her lips curved faintly, a ghost of her usual defiance. "You?" Always giving orders. Her words slurred, and the sound cut through him sharper than any blade. Cale's mind raced. The nearest Apache camp was 2 days' journey on foot too far. The settlers' town, half a day away, would not welcome a warrior like him carrying a bleeding white woman. They would not see the truth. They would see only a savage with stolen prey. If he went there, he risked death. But if he didn't, Evelyn would be the one to die. For the first time in years, Cale hesitated not because of fear for himself, but because the decision meant life or death for someone else. He pressed harder on the makeshift bandage, feeling the warm seep of blood beneath. "Spirits, forgive me," he murmured, his voice breaking. "I cannot lose her." The choice hardened within him like stone. He would risk the town. He would risk the noose, the bullet, the mob, anything to keep her heart beating. He bent low, his forehead pressing briefly against hers, the gesture one of desperation and intimacy he had never dared before. "Hold on, little flame. I will carry you to safety." Her eyes fluttered open at his whisper, dazed but searching. "Why?" The question hung between them, fragile as breath. He swallowed hard, forcing himself to answer with what little truth he could offer. "Because I need you alive more than I need my own life." Without waiting for her reply, Cale scooped her into his arms. She was lighter than he expected, too light, and the weakness in her body made dread coil tighter around his heart. He rose, adjusting her against his chest, careful of the wound. She stirred faintly, her head falling against his shoulder, her breath hot and shallow against his neck. The fire flickered behind him as he stepped into the darkness, each stride steady, measured. The land stretched wide and merciless, yet he moved with the determination of a man who had no room left for doubt. Every shadow could hide danger, every rustle could be an ambush. But his only thought was of the fragile weight he carried. As he walked, his mind churned with the risks. The settlers would not believe she had come to him by chance, nor that he had saved her from death. They would assume the worst: abduction, violence, some monstrous act. His blood ran colder still at the thought of what they might do to him. But if Evelyn lived, perhaps she could speak for him. Perhaps she would tell them the truth, and if she didn't, then at least he would know he had not failed her. The moon broke free from the clouds, casting a silver path before him. He took it as a sign, though whether from the spirits or from his own desperate heart, he could not say. With each step toward the settlers' town, the weight of his choice pressed heavier. But he did not falter. The risk was too great. The danger was certain. Yet he pressed on, whispering an Apache under his breath, a vow, a plea, and a prayer all at once. Live, Evelyn. Live, and let them see you are not my prisoner, but my reason. And so the Apache warrior carried her into the unknown, his resolve forged in fear, love, and the kind of hope that could either save them both or destroy everything. The first gray light of dawn stretched across the horizon as Cale approached the outskirts of the settlers' town. His muscles burned from the long night's trek, but he did not slow. Evelyn lay limp against his chest, her body frighteningly still except for the faint rise and fall of her breath. Every step he took carried the same thought: just a little farther. Just hold on, the town was waking. Thin trails of smoke rose from chimneys, and the distant clang of a blacksmith's hammer rang through the air. Dogs barked, horses snorted, and shutters creaked open as people began their day. Cale's jaw tightened. He knew what they would see when he entered: an Apache warrior, tall and fierce, blood on his hands and a wounded white woman in his arms. They would not ask questions first. They would act. Still, he pressed forward. His blood had run cold the night before when Evelyn bled in his arms, but now it burned hot with determination. He would not let her die on his watch. The first settler to notice him was a boy no older than 12. The lad froze, his pail of water sloshing as he stared wide-eyed at the warrior striding down the dirt road. Then the boy shouted, "Indian! He's got a woman!" The word spread like wildfire. Doors banged open, men poured into the street with rifles in hand, and women gasped, pulling their children close. A wall of suspicion rose before Cale instantly. "Hold!" A gruff voice barked. The town sheriff stepped forward, a burly man with a pistol already drawn. His eyes narrowed at the sight of Evelyn in Cale's arms. "What have you done to her, savage?" Cale didn't flinch. His voice carried the weight of command, though it cracked with urgency. "She's hurt. Arrow. Needs your doctor." He adjusted Evelyn slightly, making her face visible to them. "She lives still, but not for long if you waste time." The townsfolk murmured, their eyes darting between the pale, bleeding woman and the Apache who carried her like something precious. A few lowered their rifles uncertainly, but suspicion still burned hot. The sheriff's gaze hardened. "You expect us to believe you didn't do this? That you're here to save her?" Cale's temper flared, but he forced it down. Now was not the time for pride. He dropped to one knee slowly, showing he bore no weapon. Lowering Evelyn into view so they could see the blood-soaked bandages, the desperate rise and fall of her chest. "Believe what you will. Just save her." His voice broke, raw and unguarded. "Please." The crowd hesitated until Evelyn stirred. Her eyes cracked open, unfocused but determined. With what strength she had left, she rasped out a few words. "He saved me." The sheriff froze. The crowd fell into uneasy silence. For a moment, even the air seemed to hold its breath. Then an older woman, the town's midwife, pushed through the line of men with rifles. "Out of my way!" she snapped, her apron already stained from years of tending the sick. She bent to examine Evelyn, her sharp eyes missing nothing. "She's bad off. Needs care right now." She looked at Cale, and though suspicion lingered, she nodded curtly. "Bring her inside." The sheriff shifted uneasily. "Ma'am," I said now. The woman barked. "Do you want her blood on your hands while you argue over skin color?" Cale rose again, cradling Evelyn close, and followed the midwife toward a small house at the edge of town. Rifle still tracked his every step, and he knew he walked a razor's edge one wrong move and they'd gun him down. Yet, in that moment, none of it mattered. Evelyn's weak hand had curled faintly against his chest as if clinging to him, and that small act of trust fueled every step forward. Inside the house, the midwife cleared a table, barking orders for water, clean linens, and her satchel of herbs. "Lay her here." Cale did, carefully, his large hands reluctant to let go. For the first time since the ordeal began, a flicker of hope stirred in his chest. She was in the care of someone who could help. But the tension in the room did not ease. The sheriff stood in the doorway, gun still in hand, his eyes locked on Cale. "You'll answer for this when she's stable," he warned. Cale met his gaze, unflinching. "So be it. Just keep her alive." And as the healer set to work and the townsfolk whispered outside, Cale stood like a sentinel, every nerve taut, torn between suspicion that could erupt any second and the fragile hope that Evelyn might yet live. The air inside the midwife's home smelled of herbs, iron, and fear. Evelyn lay on the wooden table, her face ghost pale, her breath shallow, every rise and fall of her chest a fragile miracle. The midwife worked with sure, practiced hands, stitching, pressing, murmuring words of comfort, even as sweat beaded on her brow. Cale stood nearby, every muscle coiled, his hands still stained with her blood. The townsfolk's voices filtered through the walls, angry and fearful, like a storm gathering outside. Rifles clicked. Boots shuffled. And over it all, the sheriff's voice barked orders, keeping the crowd restless but contained. The healer glanced up at Cale once, her expression a mix of suspicion and something softer. "She's fighting. That's the only reason she's still breathing." She tightened the bandage around Evelyn's side. "But she need rest. Days, weeks maybe. No lifting, no stress." Cale nodded, though the weight in his chest didn't ease. He had brought her here to save her life, but in doing so, he might have doomed himself. The door creaked open, and the sheriff stepped in, his pistol holstered, but his hand never far from it. His eyes swept the room, lingering on Evelyn before pinning Cale with a cold glare. "She's alive. For now. But you," his voice sharpened, "you'll answer for why you brought her here, for why she's bleeding in the first place." Cale stood tall, the fire in his eyes tempered with exhaustion. "An ambush," he said simply. "Bandits. She was caught in the crossfire. I carried her from the mountain. You can believe me or not." The sheriff's lip curled. "A likely story. A woman found bleeding in the arms of an Apache? My people will string you up before sundown." Cale's jaw tightened, but before he could answer, a weak, hoarse voice rose from the table. "He's telling the truth." Every head turned. Evelyn's eyes were open now, glassy but sharp with intent. She struggled to lift her hand, her fingers trembling as they reached toward Cale. He was at her side instantly, taking her hand in his, steadying it. Her lips curved faintly. "He saved me. Not once, but twice. You owe him more than suspicion." The sheriff frowned, caught between the word of a respected settler's daughter and the fury of the crowd outside. "Evelyn," but she cut him off with a strength that surprised even Cale. "You call him savage. But who here carried me through the night? Who here bled to keep me alive?" Her gaze shifted toward Cale, soft but fierce. He did. Silence thickened in the room. The midwife straightened, folding her arms, her voice sharp. The girl speaks true. Whatever he is, he risked his life for her. If you hang him, the blood won't be his alone, it'll be on your conscience. The sheriff bristled, but the conviction in Evelyn's voice had cut deep. He spat to the side, growling, "We'll see what the town decides. But until then, he doesn't leave this house." Cale gave a single nod. He could endure their hatred. What mattered was Evelyn breathing, her pulse strong enough for defiance. As the sheriff left, the midwife muttered under her breath, "Fools, the lot of them. Can't see past their own fear." Then she turned to Cale, her eyes narrowing. "Stay close to her. She trusts you, and right now, that may be the only reason she keeps fighting." Night fell again. The crowd outside eventually dispersed, though tension still hummed in the air. Inside, Evelyn drifted in and out of sleep, her hand never straying far from Cale's. Each time her eyes fluttered open, she found him there unmoving, watchful, as though her life depended on his every breath. At last, in the hush between midnight and dawn, she whispered, "You risked everything for me." Cale leaned closer, his voice low, the words torn from his soul. "I would do it again, 1,000 times." Her fingers curled weakly around his. "Then promise me, when I'm strong again, you won't walk away." For the first time in years, Cale felt something break inside him, a wall he had built from pain, exile, and solitude. He pressed her hand to his chest over the steady beat of his heart. "I am yours to command." Outside, the town still doubted. Danger lingered, suspicion sharp as ever. But in that moment, with her hand in his and life returning to her voice, Cale understood something greater than fear. This was no accident, no mistake. The spirits had bound them together in blood and fire, and no matter what came next, whether the town rose against him or not, he knew one truth would never change. He was hers, and she was his. Forever.